Ahoy and welcome back to Leia's Library. Find yourself a cozy corner, get yourself a cozy drink, and let's get started. Today we will be looking at romances that didn't make my asexual eyes bleed, by which I mean romances with zero spice. Zero. It's the opposite of spice. These are the yogurt of romances. I don't know if I like the sound of that. Frozen yogurt of ice cream. It's the ice cream of romances, but not mint ice cream because that is also spicy. It's just cold spicy and I can't have it and it's sad. So it's not mint ice cream. What am I even saying? Anyway, Jiminy Cricket. So whether you are ace or not, you are welcome to watch this video. We welcome you here with open arms. Who's we? I guess it's me, and maybe my, oh, you can't really see them, my literary boys up there, William Shakespeare, Sherlock Holmes, and Edgar Allan Poe. We welcome you with open arms to all of these unspicy ice cream romances. Because sometimes you want to just read a book where there are characters who fall in love, but who don't get past first base, and that's my preferred base. But yes, not most of these aren't even romance books. They're just books that happen to have a romance in them, and that romance does not get sexual. So, or at least it doesn't get sexual on page. Okay, before I talk myself into a puddle, let's get into it. First up on the list is anything written by Jane Austen. It's quite broad, but it's true. Any Jane Austen is prime ace real estate. I don't know if I've actually ever met an ace person who doesn't like Jane Austen or really like very old classic stories in general, or like classic literature or film. Just anything set like pretty much before the 1960s, I'd say. That's the prime ace territory. There's just something about the lack of overt sensuality that makes every tiny moment of closeness that much more intimate. And I think that's what draws a lot of people to it, ace or not. There's also just such a lovely sense of security when reading Jane Austen books, or actually like most books written in or set in the Regency era, because you know that there won't be anything explicit, and then Bridgerton had to come along and ruin that a bit. I'm not still bitter about it or anything. Like, okay, but like aloes get everything else. Can we just leave the Regency era for the aces? Can we have that, please? But fine. Guess the aloes can have Bridgerton. Anyway, Pride and Prejudice, Emma, and Northanger Abbey are my favorite Jane Austens. But if you want to hear me talk about all the Jane Austen books, I also have a video on that. I'll link it in the description if I remember. Future Leia, this is your reminder. You probably won't hear this because you skip through editing so fast, but anyway. But if you're looking for a romance that's most significant form of intimacy is hand touching, then any Jane Austen will have you covered. Next up is The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie. This is a YA fantasy / retelling. It is inspired by the Shimchong myth of Korean folklore. In this story, the village of our main character, whose name is Mina, I've heard it pronounced Minna, but Mina makes more sense to me. I could be wrong, though. Also, from the little Korean I know, Mina makes more sense pronunciation-wise, but also, I could be wrong. I am a baby beginner Korean speaker. I'm gonna go with Mina, and if I'm incorrect, somebody let me know. Anyway, the village of our main character, Mina, it is customary there for every year they sacrifice a girl to the ocean. They have her jump into the ocean in order for her to become the bride of the sea god who lives at the bottom of the ocean in the spirit world. The hope is that once the sea god has the right bride, then he will stop sending storms that devastate this village, and I think possibly the world, but especially this village. And this year's pick is Shimchong, and she's been picked mostly because of her ethereal beauty. She's also very kind, but she's very beautiful. The problem is that Shimchong and Mina's brother are actually in love. So in order to spare Shimchong and her brother heartache, Mina decides to sacrifice herself instead and jumps into the ocean instead of Shimchong. And she is swept away into the spirit realm, where she discovers that the sea god has actually been put into this mysterious enchanted sleep. This story is just so lovely. It's lovely is the perfect word for it. It's also just like pretty. Like the cover says it all. It's this. I've heard it referred to several times as being very reminiscent of a Studio Ghibli movie, which I totally get behind, especially the Spirited Away, which I love that description so much because I find it super accurate, and I even coincidentally have my Studio Ghibli mug today. How about that? I just recently restocked on one of my absolute favorite teas, and I'm so pleased. Anyway, this book is very atmospheric, and it's very, like, the world is so beautiful. And the romance in this book is so cute. It's so charming. So this is a YA, but I find that it personally reads a bit more like a middle grade in terms of tone, which I really enjoy. I really like middle grade. I will say that the romance does come about quite quickly. I think the whole book takes place in like a month, so there is limited time. So I would have preferred a little bit more time for it to develop, but because this is a fairy tale, and fairy tales tend to advance a bit more quickly, there are very small time frames, I forgive it for that. And I just love the two romantic characters. I love them individually. They're both really great individually as characters, and then together they're just very cute, and I just really enjoyed this book. And yeah. Next up is a book that has a very similar name, which I didn't realize until I just started saying this out loud, but it's The House in the Cerulean Sea. Oh, it even has like a similar color pattern. Look at that. How about that? Someone should do a study if books with C in the title, if books with long titles that end in the word C and have a cerulean teal and pink color scheme just have unspicy romances. Anyway, House in the Cerulean Sea is a fantasy fiction, or a magical realism fantasy fiction. I think magical realism fits it a bit better. So our main character is Linus Baker. He is a man in his 40s, and he leads a very quiet, solitary life, just by himself with his cat, who's, side note, excellent. I love his cat so much. So it's just him, his cat, and his old records. He is a caseworker at the department in charge of magical youth, and he spends his days overseeing the well-being of children in these government-sanctioned orphanages for magical children. However, Linus's life takes a sudden turn when he is requested by extremely upper management to evaluate a certain orphanage in this remote island, and whether its particularly dangerous occupants, notably the Antichrist himself, are likely to bring about the end of days. So the main relationship slash main relationships in this book are more about found family, and it's perfect. It is a perfect found family story. I love the found family trope. It's one of my absolute favorite tropes of all time, and this book does it so well. But within that found family, there is also a romance. I keep getting this stupid hair in my mouth. And not only is it a romance, but it's a romance between two men. And it's a romance, and not only is it a romance between two men, but it's also a bit of romance between two men who are in their 40s. And I love that. I love that so much. We don't get enough romances where the romantic characters are 30 plus. Romance doesn't stop after your 20s, and we should have more stories about people falling in love after their 20s. So yes, this couple is so sweet. They're perfectly meant to be, and I can read all of their scenes without sighing in disappointment or rolling my eyes. Warning, this book will give you the warm and fuzzies. A descriptor on mine says it's like being wrapped up in a big gay blanket, and yeah, I think that's really the only review that matters of this book. It sums it up perfectly. Next up, we have Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno-Garcia, which is an adult mythology / fantasy historical fiction, I guess. The book takes place during the Jazz Age in Mexico. There is a fruit fly buzzing around my phone, and it is so distracting. Sir, can you please? Nobody invited you. This is a private recording. Anyway, our main character is Cassiopeia Tun. She lives with her wealthy grandfather along with her mother and a bunch of other relatives. But Cassiopeia is looked down upon by the rest of them because they disapproved of her father. So Cassiopeia's grandfather essentially uses her as free labor. She's essentially his servant. And she longs for a life of her own outside of this house, but she doesn't believe she'll ever really get the chance to do that or to have that until one day she opens a curious wooden box in her grandfather's room and unknowingly frees the Mayan god of death, who requests her help in recovering his throne from his treacherous brother. So this story is based on Mexican folklore, and it's written like a fairy tale, or like maybe like a myth, which I didn't get at first, but so it was kind of confusing the way it was written. But as soon as it clicked, it just set the whole tone, and it made the story so much better. Like, the story was already good, but like I really added to the atmosphere of it. So I thoroughly enjoyed this book. But I was also super invested in the romance. And for the record, this is not a romance book. There is stuff going on, and the romance is very much secondary. Important, but secondary. There are few romances and couples that I continue to think about after I finished a book, and this is one of them. I read this book a year ago, a little over a year ago, and I still think about them every now and then. The ending of this book, I was thinking about it for months afterwards. Months. It hurt me, and it was perfect. I also really enjoyed the build-up of this romance. Unlike The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea, this one does take its time. It starts out like really small, and you get to watch it grow so naturally, and it's just so nice. And seeing the characters slowly grow closer together is just so satisfying. Because you get, like, there's such a development that happens from the beginning of the book to the end of the book in both characters, mostly in the God of Death. He has the most drastic change, but you also get to watch Cassiopeia go from, like, someone who thought that a life of her own would only be in her dreams to somebody who's like, I'm gonna take what I want. And it's just so nice. I love both of them. And everything in this book has like a little magical realism twist to it. And I love magical realism so much. Like the villain in this story, the way he realizes that the two main characters are falling for each other is he sends out a bird to spy on them. And the bird ends up catching their sigh in a seashell and brings it back to him. And is that not just... I love that. I think that's adorable and so cool. I really want to own this book. The last book on the list is Lovely War by Julie Berry. This is a YA historical fiction romance. It is the only actual romance book on this list. So, the premise of this story is that it is set on the verge of World War II, or maybe World War II has already started, but it's like early stages or just about to start. And the Greek goddess Aphrodite is on trial after being caught with Ares, the god of war, despite being married to Hephaestus, the god of the forge. Those are a lot of names if you're not familiar with Greek gods. Essentially, the goddess of love was cheating on her husband with the god of war. And now she's on trial for it. As her defense, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, explains to the other gods why love and war are always connected, or always linked. And the evidence she brings is the story of these two young couples who met during World War I. So our first couple is Hazel, a shy pianist, and James, who is a young soldier with dreams of becoming an architect that get cut a little short when he is enlisted to go fight during World War I. Oh, that was phrased terribly. And our second couple is Aubrey, who is a musician and member of an all-black regiment being sent to Europe to help end the Great War, and Colette, who is a Belgian singer who's already survived unspeakable tragedies because of the war. And you know, there's so many books about love in times of war that you'd think they'd all be dried up and exhausted by now, and yet some of them still slap. And like I said, this is, aside from the Jane Austen ones, which are all romances now that I think of it, this is the only modern one on the list that's a romance. Primarily, Fruit Fly. Begone! There is no fruit here! Anyway, so this story is fully centered on the relationships of the two main couples. All of the characters get their time to shine as individuals before we get to see them fall for each other and grow together, and it's very sweet. It's a very sweet story tinged with an expected amount of tragedy because it is a wartime story. It really is a lovely book. This is another one that, like, lovely is a perfect word to describe it. It's very sweet, it's very charming, it's also just very well written, and there's zero spice in it, which is just how I like it. And that is it for this video. Let me know what you thought of these books down in the comments, and if you have read any of them. If you have your own favorite unspicy romantic books, feel free to let me know about them. I would love to know. I love unspicy love. If you'd like to find me elsewhere, you can find me on Instagram at Leia Like the Princess. You can also find my little embroidery and art store over there at Moonlit Cat Creations, or you can go directly to the website at moonlitcatcreations.com. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay cozy.